of my fears. I love you, Lord, nothing can block your highway before me. With you I'll leap over the wall, over them all.
Luke chapter 21, we've been, I guess 2 weeks, 2 weeks here in this chapter, and Jesus is pointing his disciples, which is anyone who wants to learn, hopefully all of us here today, pointing his disciples to the true, timeless beauty that was there in the temple precinct, in the temple building. And he said something that they wouldn't have seen, a woman doing something she never wanted to be noticed, but the Lord notices things like that, and what she did was beautiful. It was lovely. It's timeless. It was an operation of love, as all operations of love are. It's not a matter of I'm enough and I've got enough and this is enough, but it's always giving out of a sense of inadequacy and weakness. But what I can do, I will do. And so she did. And those deeds of love are always timeless, always beautiful, never a waste. But his disciples were looking at the great works of Herod, the building, the stones, all of this stuff that to them seemed like, oh, now there's the art, there's the beauty, there's the glory. And so when Jesus was focusing on true beauty and they were lost in something else, here it says in chapter 21 that Jesus told them, verse 3, he said, "Truly I say to you, this poor widow put in more than everyone else altogether. They out of their surplus put into the offering. She out of her poverty put in all that she had to live on." And while some were talking about the temple, his own disciples, caught up with the temple building, adorned with beautiful stones and votive gifts, he then said to them, "As for these things that you are looking at and concentrating on, as for these things, the days will come in which there will not be left one stone upon another that will not be torn down." So when he said that to them, these being Jewish people, Jewish patriots, looking at not only the emblem of their national glory, but their religious glory as well, when they heard that not one stone would be left upon another, as far as they were concerned, that's the end of the world. They didn't doubt that it was going to happen. If Jesus said it's going to happen, it's going to happen. And to them, it was one of the most terrible thoughts that this could happen. And of course, the natural question is when? It's the end of the world. It's the greatest crisis that could be considered. And so their question is framed, as all questions, coming from their own hearts. They questioned him, saying in verse 7, "Teacher, when therefore will these things be? And what will be the sign when these things are about to take place?" And Matthew adds them also, saying, and what will be the sign of your coming and of the end of this age? So again, all of this, to them, it was all one. The coming down of this building and the coming of the Lord and the end of the age, it was all one. And for us, as we read through this again, for us, some of it is clearly history. You look at something like we looked at last week there in verse 20. He says specifically, verse 20, "When you see Jerusalem surrounded by armies, then recognize that her desolation is at hand." And that happened. It happened in the first century, 70 AD. The Roman armies surrounded it. It's all well testified. It's clearly history. But for the rest of the words that we look at again here today, finishing the second half, is the remainder history. Clearly, some parts are history. For them, it was all one. It's the end of the world. For us, we know some of it's history. Perhaps it's entirely history. And that may bother you that I say so, but I didn't say so. I said, well, I did say perhaps. And you know what? It might be entirely history. One thing I can say for sure, not a whole lot of those, I can say that historically, it has been seen as entirely history. I can read myself commentaries in English, books in English written in the 17th, 18th, 19th century, where scholars are looking at this and they're saying, oh yeah, all of these words, all of this happened in the first century AD. Historically, they saw it as history, so maybe so. But here's one more thing I can say for sure. I don't know. I don't know. And even more so, I don't need to know. And this part, I hope you hear, is for all of you. At least that's my advice to you, not as your leader, because I don't want to lead anyone. I don't want you to be misled, and I certainly don't want to be the one to mislead. I'm not your leader. I'm just Bubba Bruce. I'm your brother. I'm your friend. Jesus said, call no man father, no man leader, no man teacher, no man rabbi. You have one in heaven. That's enough. You're all brothers. And so the best thing I can do for you, I hope to be a good friend, a good brother. And I would say, you don't need to know. And so what? What is it? I mean, I've got 3 brothers, and they're wrong a lot of the time. I'm wrong a lot of the time. I say I don't think that you need to know, but we've got higher authority than that as far as the don't need to know. And it's by Jesus. And actually, Jesus, according to Luke, because you guys know, I think you all know, that the second half of the gospel according to Luke is called the book of Acts. And in the book of Acts, Jesus is there this is the risen Jesus with his disciples. It says in Acts chapter 1 that he gathered them together and he commanded them not to leave Jerusalem, but to wait for what the Father had promised, which he said, you heard of from me. For John baptized with water, that is, John the Baptist did that, but you shall be baptized in the Holy Spirit not many days from now. So when they had come together, they were asking him, saying, Lord, is it at this time that you are restoring the kingdom to Israel? And he said to them, it's not for you to know times or epochs, which the Father has fixed by his own authority, but you shall receive power when the Holy Spirit has come upon you, and you shall be my witnesses in Jerusalem and in Judea, nice Jewish quarters, but even more to the Samaritans you will be witnesses, and even more to the remotest parts of the earth you will be my witnesses. So he says, here's what you need. You need patience, wait. It's not many more days, just wait. You need power, the Holy Spirit will come. And then what you need to be is witnesses. Witnesses of who I am, not just locally, not even across the border to the Samaritans, but to the uttermost parts of the earth. And those are the needs still today. Need patience, need power, need to proclaim Christ everywhere without borders or limitations, to the remotest parts of the earth. And as far as when is the kingdom going to be restored and all of that, Jesus said, it's not for you to know. Why can't we accept that? I mean, that's pretty plain. That's pretty clear. He doesn't even just say you don't need to know. He says it's not for you to know. But that's a rhetorical question. Why can't we accept it? We don't want to, that's for sure. You know, when we talk about security, whether it's homeland security or military security, any classified information is always dispensed on a need-to-know basis. Only if you need to know will you know, and that's how we maintain security. In the same way, in the Lord, when he's giving us information, it's not his personal security he's worried about. He's secure. And it's not heavenly homeland security that he's concerned about. It's your personal security that is of utmost importance. He doesn't want your heart to be troubled. He doesn't want you to be wrapped up in the wrong things. And so for your security, it's always on a need-to-know basis. He will tell us everything we need to know. And if we don't need to know, then we don't need to know. Now, all of that as a preliminary, and I said a lot of this last week. That being said, we got this whole chapter here in front of us. Some of it is historical, maybe all of it is historical, but it's still instructive. And there are 7 things. I'll go over the first 4, and then I'll run out of time. No, I'll try to do it fast, but there are 7 clear things that we need to know that are contained in this section. And if we know the things that we need to know, hey, we're good. And so the things that we need to know, verse 8, he said, see to it that you don't be misled, for many will come in my name, saying, I am he, and the time is at hand. Don't follow after them. So the first thing you need to know is don't be a follower. You know, you don't need to know which ones are the wrong ones. Just don't follow anyone but Jesus. Don't be misled by letting someone lead you. That's number one. Secondly, he says, when you hear of wars and disturbances, don't be frightened, don't be terrified. These things have to take place, but the end does not follow immediately. He gives a whole list of scary things. Nation will rise against nation, kingdom against kingdom. There'll be great earthquakes in various places. There will be plagues and famines, and even terrors and great signs coming in the heavens, up in the sky. All of that is scary stuff. And yet he says, number two, don't be scared, don't be frightened. Number one, don't be a follower. Number two, don't be fearful. Those two things we need to know all the time. And then he goes on to say, verse 14, now take that back, not too far back, verse 12. But before all these things, they will lay their hands on you and will persecute you, delivering you into the synagogues and prisons, and bringing you before kings and governors. You notice I emphasize those words, synagogues, kings, because we still have synagogues, but people aren't put on trial for their lives in synagogues anymore. And kings, there are still symbolic kings, but they don't have that much power, at least in the Western world anymore. But back then, they did have a lot before kings and governors for my name's sake, and this will lead to an opportunity for your testimony. And my point is, clearly that's historical. That's the book of Acts. They did go before kings. They did come into synagogues. All that part is historical, but here's something we all need to know. He says, so make up your minds not to prepare beforehand to defend yourselves. So I believe that's timeless. Yes, they needed to know that they were going to be persecuted by their own family members, by their own brethren, that they would be brought into their synagogues. For them, synagogue was like home, it's church, it's family, but you're going to be put on trial there. They needed to know that because this is the first generation of Jewish Christians who are going to be persecuted by Jewish brethren. And they're going to feel like there's no precedent for this. Nothing like this has ever happened. And it's true, nothing like that had happened, not for following Christ. So they needed to know. He told them specifically, this is going to happen to you. Book of Acts, it did happen. They needed to know. But we all need to know, verse 14, I think. Make up your minds not to prepare beforehand to defend yourself. And he goes on to speak of how the Holy Spirit, how God will help you. And I think that's just a across-the-board deal. We should not be defensive. Don't be a follower. Don't be fearful. Don't be defensive. We prepare in our mind. We may not be on trial in a court somewhere, but we get all these things where we're starting to get defensive. We're starting to worry about our protective stance in dealing with somebody else. We forget who we're dealing with. We think they're the enemy, and we start to get defensive. I think that when Christians start to get defensive, that's when they become offensive. They become offensive because they're fighting the wrong battle. They're getting all worked up. So I think that's timeless. Don't be defensive. He says, verse 15, I will give you utterance and wisdom which none of your opponents will be able to resist or refute. I'll give you what you need to say. And you'll be delivered up even by parents and brothers and relatives and friends, and they will put some of you to death. Again, they needed to know that. I'm glad I don't know what I'm going to face in the future. I don't need to know. But first generation Jewish believers, they needed to know, look, this is happening to you because it had to be that way. Jesus said it would be that way. You'll be hated by all on account of my name. And yet you need to know this too. Not a hair of your head will perish. And by your endurance, you will preserve your souls. You'll keep them going by just keep going, just persevere. So again, they needed to know all of that, and that's history. I don't need to know my future. If I needed to prepare me, he would tell me. But he doesn't tell me about the future. I don't want to know. I do still eat fortune cookies and usually find that they tell me I'm wonderful. And so they tell me things I wanted to believe anyway because they're good marketers. When they put those things in there, they usually don't tell you terrible things. But they needed to know, so he told them. But none of us need to be defensive or followers or frightened. And then he goes on to say, verse 20, But when you see Jerusalem surrounded by armies, then recognize that her desolation is at hand. And then let those who are living in Judea flee to the mountains. Let those who are living in the city of Jerusalem depart from there. Let not those who are in the country go into the city to make a patriotic stance and fight there on the walls of the Alamo or fight for the defense of Jerusalem. Don't do that, he said. Don't be heroic. Don't be a patriotic hero. If you're in there, get out. If you're out, don't go in, because these are the days of vengeance, in order that all things which are written may be fulfilled. Woe to those who are with child and to those who nurse babes in those days, for there will be great distress upon the land and wrath to this people. And they will fall by the edge of the sword and will be led captive into all the nations, and Jerusalem will be trampled underfoot by the Gentiles until the times of the Gentiles be fulfilled. And so, again, very specific. Historically, we know it happened. They needed to know that. And so they were told. And it just encourages me to know that if we need to know something, the Lord will tell us. If he doesn't tell us, we don't need to know. And all of that, and yet I believe even in that last little section we just read, I think there's a timeless truth. That part about fleeing and getting out of there, what that tells me is that sometimes the most courageous thing to do is to quit the battle. You know, sometimes it's, for them, they needed to know that, look, you're not a coward, you're not unpatriotic, you're not a traitor because you won't fight the Romans for the sake of the Jewish nation. No, you're doing what Jesus told you to do. And sometimes for us, we need to understand that by walking away from a battle, we're not cowards, we're actually being wise. We're actually doing what we ought to do. Sometimes the turning the other cheek is the strongest, most courageous thing to do. Hard to do, maybe harder than to fight, but that, I believe, is a timeless truth. So the first four, don't be a follower, don't be fearful, don't be defensive. The fourth one, don't be quarrelsome. Don't be getting into the battles. I mean, there are battles to fight, but don't be one who's like, you know, hey, man, you just dissed my family and my nation and whatever, my religion, don't be quarrelsome. I think those four things we need to know, and they're timeless truths. So that's last week. Whew. Catch my breath. I got a few more minutes to explain everything else that I don't know. At least we can read the rest of it, and we've seen I see three more things in here that I think we all need to know based on what he says next. He says, verse 25, and there will be signs in the sun and the moon and stars, and upon the earth dismay among nations, in perplexity at the roaring of the sea and of the waves, men fainting from fear and the expectation of the things that are coming upon this world. For the powers of the heavens will be shaken, and then they will see the Son of Man coming in a cloud with power and great glory. Now, could that be first century? Could that be historical? Is that something that still has to take place? We typically see it that way. I don't know. Again, I can tell you that historically, it's been seen as historical. I can tell you that it's relatively recent that all of that was looked at as something truly, just like it says, literally cosmic. Sign in the suns and the moon and the stars and the powers being shaken. All this stuff that in terms of language, it was common language for that time. Hopefully, as we learn more and more about the cosmos and science and the true nature of the universe around us, we might think that things don't even necessarily work that way in terms of the pictures. But these are vivid pictures, and from an earth platform, that's the way we see things, and it was common language for them. But if those of you who are staying awake are awake because you're already getting upset at me. But I'm not telling you, I'm not leading you anywhere, because I don't know. But historically, it's been seen as something, even this, as something that happened back around the time when the Romans surrounded Jerusalem. And the valid question, at least for me, is how is that? You know, I mean, you might read the history. It's a horrible history of what happened to Jerusalem and the literal tearing down of the temple and all the people murdered and crucified and horrible, horrible history. But you look at the sign and the sun and moon and the Son of Man coming in the clouds and all of that stuff, you say, how could that have been fulfilled then? And the answer is simply, because I'm not going to get bogged down in a whole lot of time, it would be by taking this as symbolic language. Rather than take it literal, it's symbolic language. And there are ways to do it, and I'm not going to even try to do it. I'm not even going to say that's the best way to understand it. And if anyone's getting upset with me right now, let me remind you the first four. Don't be following me. Don't be a follower. Don't be fearful. Don't be defensive. And don't be quarrelsome. Okay? So if you can hang with those four, then maybe you can just accept the fact that I don't know. Maybe even this part is still a symbolic historical reference. But I think more importantly, I don't need to know. And I think I can share that with you. You don't need to know. I don't think that you do. I don't think that you do. But here's what you do need to know. Here's the important part. Verse 28 says, when these things begin to take place, straighten up and lift up your heads because your redemption or your Redeemer is drawing nigh. Now you might say, well, how can I do that if I don't know the day, if I don't know the signs, if I don't know the seasons, this whole thing about what's happening, if I don't know, how can I know when to straighten up and my Redeemer's drawing nigh? But you know what? Throughout history, there have been times when people have thought this was happening. They've believed it. They've happened, and there will be more times like that in the future. And it may not be the end of the world. Cheer up, you might be wrong. It might just be another horrible, terrible calamity, but it's not the end of the world. But I would say that anytime, verse 26, anytime when people are fainting from fear at the expectation of what is coming next, whether that be in the days of the Mongol hordes coming into Rome, or the Black Plague, or the First World War, or the Second World War, or the Holocaust, or wherever anyone is fainting from fear and the expectation of, oh my gosh, what is next? Any time like that, I think still what you need to know is when those kind of things begin to take place, straighten up, lift up your heads, because your redemption, your Redeemer is drawing near. I don't believe that the Lord leaves redemption for one generation that happens to be there at the very end. I believe that all of us face the end at some point. We all come to the end of our world somewhere. We all come to places where we come to the end of our strength and we're fainting with fear. In all those times, knowing that there is someone who's beside you and who's for you, and your Redeemer is near, and lifting up your heads. Instead of being bogged down by what's in front of your face, lift up your head a little higher and know that you're headed toward Him. I think you need to know that. I need to know that all the time. And I wouldn't try to figure out all the other things and say, when do I go into that mode? When do I kick that into gear? I would say kick it into gear anytime and every time when you feel like fainting, when you feel like, what next? Well, I can't handle this anymore. In all those instances, when it begins to take place, may not be the end of the world, but it could sure be a whole lot better day if you'll just straighten up. Not straighten up and fly right, but straighten up to see right. You know, don't be downcast. Straighten up, lift up your head. This is about your vision, right? This is about, rather than just look at the dirt and say, man, this world's filled with dirt. Straighten up, lift up your head, and see something higher. This is lifting up your vision, lifting up your sights, being more optimistic, for good reason optimistic, by faith optimistic. I think we need to know that. Don't be downcast in your vision. Whenever everyone else tends to be, or you're tempted to be, don't be downcast in your vision. We all need to know that. And then he told them a parable. He said in verse 29, behold the fig tree and all the trees. As soon as they put forth leaves, you see it, and you know for yourselves that summer is now near. Even so, you too, when you see these things happening, recognize that the kingdom of God is near. Truly I say to you, this generation will not pass away until all these things take place. Heaven and earth will pass away, but my words will not pass away. And so now that picture of the fig tree, and that's not a hard parable to figure out. Basically, like any tree, the blossoms mean that the fruit's on its way. It's just a season away. He's very specific. It's a generation away. So he says that. We can read it. I don't think we have to be scholars or extra clever to figure out the general picture. But as far as what does it mean? Wow. I don't know. I mean, I know it means that when it starts, it's going to finish, and I know that it's going to come pretty quickly. Let me just, since I already told you I don't know, let me just ask the questions a little bit more. Does this have anything to do with May the 14th, 1948? Does this have anything to do with the fact that the United Nations took over a mandate from the United Kingdom saying we got to do something about this problemed place here in the Middle East, and the United Nations said, well, we can't figure it out, so let's divide it, let's go ahead and do this whole deal. And the United Kingdom said, we're out of here. We're tired of this thing. We're out. And they set the date, May 14th. We are out of here. And then David Ben-Gurion, the first prime minister of Israel, stands up and gives their Declaration of Independence and says, now, amazingly, politically, after how many centuries, now we are the nation of Israel with a Star of David flag and all of that. That's history. It happened on May the 14th, 1948 to this day. Now 70 years this year to this, on that day, we have July 4th, they have May the 14th. And that's the day. Is that the blossoming of the fig tree? I don't know. Could it be? Of course it could be. Within a generation, 40 years? I'll tell you, this is the one that had all of us. I remember, at least my older brothers told me back in 1988, when I was just a little bitty kid, that this is the end. And boy, weren't we excited in 1981 when this is 7 years, count it back, 1948, 40 years from the 48, 88. You don't have to be a math whiz. You just count 7 years of tribulation and 1981. And wow, wasn't that a powerful evangelical tool like in 1978 and 79 and 80? And of course it was. And the pieces of the puzzle seemed to fit perfectly. And I was one of them that was excited to see it all. But that was 40 years. Now it's 70 years. And you know, however many years it'll be, someone will always come up with a scenario that it really is supposed to be. But I think I'd go back to Jesus saying, it's not for you to know the times or the seasons. Or it may be, but could it also be that Jesus said, within this generation it's going to happen, and it did all happen? Historically, that it's symbolic, and it did happen? Could be that too. But here again is the important thing. You don't need to know. I confess I don't know, and I'm not ashamed that I don't know. I'm glad to be honest. I don't know. But I don't need to know. But here's what you do need to know. Here's the important part. Verse 34, be on guard that your hearts be not weighed down with dissipation and drunkenness. Dissipation, wastefulness, basically the hangover after being weighed down with drunkenness, and with the worries of life, and that day would come upon you suddenly, like a trap. He's saying something is coming, and it's coming for sure, and everyone's going to get hit by it, but don't let yourself be trapped by it. This thing is coming, but don't let it weigh you down. Be on your guard that what? Be on your guard, not that you know the day or the hour, be on your guard that your hearts may not be weighed down. That's what being alert is about. Be alert so that you don't get weighed down in the heart level. And what is it that weighs you down? Well, it could be dissipation and drunkenness. Or you might say, I don't touch a drop, and I've never, drunkenness, you know, lips that touch wine will never touch mine. But what about worry? What does it matter what weighs your heart down, whether it's wine or whether it's worry? Because he says it doesn't matter what it is that weighs your heart down, whether it's dissipation, drunkenness, or the worries of life. The point is your heart is weighed down. And the warning is if your heart is weighed down, you're going to get trapped. Things that hit everyone, because they do. Troubles hit us all. But you don't have to be trapped in your troubles. You don't have to be stuck there. And that's what the Lord is always trying to keep us from. Just don't be stuck. Take the next step. Keep moving. No temptation has overtaken you except that which is common to man. God will provide the way of escape. But if you don't take the way of escape, you're stuck. Not because you're a terrible person, but you're making some foolish choices. Jesus would say to his disciples just a couple of nights later, let not your heart be troubled. Believe in God, believe also in me. I'm going to prepare a place for you. Don't let your heart be weighed down. That's what he encourages us to not let happen. Don't let your hearts be weighed down. That would be number 6 on my list. Don't let your heart be weighed down. Number 5 was don't let your vision be cast down. Lift up your vision. Now lighten your heart by believing in God, believing also in Jesus. Don't be trapped in your troubles. For he says, verse 35, it will come upon all those who dwell on the face of the earth. He's not saying you can escape it. You cannot escape the trouble. Whether it's the big trouble called the tribulation or whether it's just your troubles, which you still call tribulation. You can't escape troubles, but you can escape the trap. You don't have to be stuck going round and round in those things. Don't let your heart be weighed down with worry or with wine. And then finally, number 7, keep on the alert at all times. You know, oftentimes we hear that. Watch out. Be vigilant. Keep on the alert at all times. But before I tell you what Jesus said, I'll just tell you what sometimes we think. We think the way to stay on alert is to stay on this constant vigilance that's really just a perpetual paranoia. You know, there are certain things that will keep you awake. I joke with you. I would be happy if you slept and rested when you come in here. If that's the only sleep and rest you get during the week, if you find peaceful rest in the presence of the Lord, God bless you. Don't snore. God bless you. I'm not worried about it. I don't need to entertain you. I don't need to hear you. You know, this is all good stuff, but be at peace. Be at rest. But you know, one of the ways that I could keep you awake is I could have you frightened that the minute you start to snooze, I'm going to point you out, or else we're going to zap you with lasers. Or if you're always fearful, you're always awake. And I don't believe that's what the Lord wants us to do. It's not be on the alert through fear. It's, what does he say? Be on the alert through prayer. That's how you stay awake. He'd already said, don't be a follower and don't be fearful. But he says the way to stay awake is to be prayerful. He says, keep on the alert at all times, praying, so that you might have the strength to escape these things. And remember, escape doesn't mean you escape the trouble. The troubles, he said in the preceding verse, it's going to hit everyone. You don't escape the trouble, you escape the trap. He says, keep on alert at all times, praying that you may escape the trap, the fainting, the falling apart that's about to take place. And what you'll do is then stand before the Son of Man. Yes, eternally, but even presently, to be able to stand in his presence. And so the encouragement is to pray. Stay on the alert through prayer, not through fear. Now, what's the power of prayer? How do you pray in order to not be trapped with the troubles of this world? You pray, oh God, save me, I'm so scared. Save me, oh God. This is really getting to me, oh God, save me. I'm messed up. I know I'm messed up. I'm sorry that I'm messed up. But God, save me. This is a trap. Get me out of this trap. Oh God, help me. Doesn't that sound encouraging? I mean, isn't that the way you want to live? Isn't that the way Jesus taught us to pray? How did he teach us to pray? Our Father. Feed us, all of us, feed us. Just today, give us the basic food. Our Father, feed us, forgive us, all of us. Deliver us from whatever. Our Father, feed us, forgive us, deliver us. That's the only prayer we got. It's the only one he gave us. That's the theme. That's the idea. That's the concept. That's the way you stay awake. You stay awake to the fact that we're in this together, but not alone. We've got a Father. And we belong to each other, not belong to this race or this religion or this nation. We belong to God, our Creator, our Father. feed us, forgive us, deliver us. You think that, you live that, you breathe that, you're awake. And you're ready to keep going on the one thing that we're here for. Our Father, feed us, forgive us, deliver us. And if you do so, then you stand before the Son of Man, because that's where the Son of Man has taken his stand. That's how he taught us to pray. That's what the Son of Man came to do. You know, George Washington may well be the political father of the United States, and David Ben-Gurion the political father of the nation of Israel. James Brown may be the godfather of soul, for that matter. You know, you can find all kinds of fathers and leaders and heroes, and that's fine as far as it goes. But ultimately, we have one Father, one that we look to, our Father. Feed us, forgive us, deliver us. If we forget that, we are asleep in the worst way. And the troubles that we all have will become a trap. Because we'll get caught up in the very worries and fears, and there's all kinds of drunkenness. You can be drunk with all kinds of political powers. You can be drunk with all kinds of ideological movements, but you're drunk and asleep the same. And you know, that week, that very week when Jesus said this to those people, that was the one where, what, 4 days before, 3 days before, all the people waving their national flags, their palms, all of them saying, save us, save now, O Son of David, O Son of David, save us. And they were so excited. And they had biblical text to say, save us, O Son of David. And Jesus sobbed. You don't know the things that make for peace. I came to teach you that this temple was supposed to be a house of prayer for all the nations. And you think it's your national thing. I came here to show you that the strength of turning the other cheek or going the extra mile for that lousy Roman soldier, or even give back to Caesar stuff, that was the way that you truly win. Love is the way you truly win. What this little widow's doing over here, that's true beauty and strength. And he came with that message, and who wanted it? Who cared? Save now, Son of David. And he wept. That's why his last question to them, we saw it a couple weeks ago, his last question, when they couldn't trick him, they couldn't trap him, they ran out of questions, he said to them, there in verse 41 of chapter 20, he said to them, how is it that they say Messiah is David's son? And only that. For David himself says in the book of Psalms, the Lord said to my Lord, sit at my right hand until I make thine enemies a footstool for thy feet. David therefore calls him Lord. How can he be merely his son? You see, even there, he takes them back to their Bible, to their scriptures, and says, read it again. Messiah is more than you think. And salvation is more than you think. And the work that God wants to do is more than you think. And if all you do is work on your little works and try to bring God into it, he's on our side, you're going to find that you're fighting the wrong battle. Those who live by the sword will die by the sword. He knew, he wept, that nation was going to be destroyed by the Romans within one generation, because you're fighting the wrong battle and you're missing the whole message. And so he ends here not with standing before the Son of David. You're going to stand before the Son of Man, because that was what Jesus referred to himself as over and over and over again. I'm the son of Adam. I'm the son of humanity. I'm the Son of Man. More than Jews, more than Samaritans, more than Romans, I'm the Son of Man. And the way that we stay awake, and the way that we stay vigilant, and the way that we're ready for the next day, whatever day might come, is to stand before our brother Jesus as he gives us introduction to our common Father. You can't escape trouble. If I thought that you could, I would try it. And then I'd write a book, and I'd sell it and make a fortune. But the fact is, you cannot avoid trouble. Of one kind or another. It may not be the end of the world, but you might wish it were. But your troubles don't have to become a trap. How's that going to happen? Don't be a follower. Don't be fearful. Don't be defensive. Don't be quarrelsome. Don't be downcast in your vision. Don't be weighed down in your heart. Wake up. How? Our Father. Feed us. Forgive us. deliver us. That's the good fight. If that's what you're living for, it's a good life. It's what we're called to. It's surely what we need to know. If there's one thing we need to know, it's that. Let's turn to him with a closing song.
You dove from on high into deep waves of grief, pulled me out of the waters and back to my feet on the high shore of hope. In a broad place I walk, while the waves crash beneath me, I stand on the rock. I love you, Lord. You light my lamp. You drive out my darkness. With you I'll run right through the midst of my fears. I love you, Lord. Nothing can block your highway before me. With you I'll leap over the wall, over them all. With you I'll run right through the midst of my fears. I love you, Lord. Nothing can block your highway before me. With you I'll leap over the wall, over them all. Deep waves of grief, pull me out of the waters and back to my feet on the high shore of hope. In a broad place I walk, while the waves crash beneath me, I stand on the rock. Light my lamp, you drive out my darkness. With you I'll run right through the midst of my fears. I love you, Lord. Nothing can block your highway before